A few weeks ago, Ned Jackson Smith had done a really lovely video in his Foundry where he had a little inset on the screen which showed you the same technique working with clay or plasticine. And that made me remember that when you're working with clay, very often it is the same techniques as you use in the kitchen. So today I'm going to give you a recipe for salt dough and show you A, how to make the salt dough, and then B, very simple techniques that you would also use when you're working with clay. And it uses just flour, salt, and water. And the easiest way to do it, if you don't have scales, is to have a straight-sided cup, and we will work with that. Just plain flour. I'm just going to add one more. A bit of one. Okay. And now I know how much salt to add. So it's all equal quantities, and just the water. Mix the salt and the flour together. It is what you would do to make pastry. It's exactly the same. And for those of you that don't feel that I know people say, oh, I'm not creative. If you like baking and you like decorating, then maybe this is more up your street. Now, I'm not adding all the water in one go, because sometimes I know when I'm making bread or pastry, if you add too much water, you end up adding a load more flour. So we don't want to do that, so you just mix it like that. That looks about right to me. I believe it uses slightly less water than milk, so do add it just a bit at a time. Okay, it feels quite grainy, doesn't feel like pastry. So you just bring it all together exactly as you would do if you're making pastry. And you can do what we're doing now. Use the dough. If you want to use a pastry dough or a biscuit dough, do that. And then you can eat what you make. Okay, that's come together pretty well. We're literally ready to roll. You don't have to use it straight away. I know I've done this with groups over weeks where we make the dough and put it into smaller batches, and then if you don't want to use it straight away, you just wrap it up, and that will keep. And I've tried this and it does keep for several weeks if you need it to. And that's our first step. So it's very quick. So if you've got children who are with you, and I think this is a nice activity to do together, where mum maybe does some of the work, and especially if you've got very young children, and it's nicely hands-on. So once we've got the dough, I'll show you very simple basic techniques that you would use with clay as well. So if you're thinking of, if you're a novice to working with clay, it's a great way just to practice using the techniques, finding how the material works. So from what I do today, the techniques are the same for clay or for pastry or dough, and I think you'll see those similarities as I show you. Simplest way to start is just by rolling and learning how to get an even thickness across the surface. If you're working with children, cutters are the easiest way to help them to do something quite quickly. Now that thickness is about 1 centimetre. That's almost too thick. I would go for something a little thinner than that, because it always goes thicker when you press the cutter through. But you don't want it too thin either. So hopefully you can see the kind of thickness, about 0.5 centimetre I think is about right. And then you just, these cutters are for gingerbread. So this is the simplest way for someone to get something fairly immediate. There we go. And you know your dough is right when you can pick it up. Now that, to my mind, is almost too thick, but you can see if you've got gingerbread cutters, you can adapt the shape as you wish. So cutting out is one way of doing it. A stimulus from one of the other videos, something that I liked, Helen's drawings, which you can download. When I saw them, I thought these have really lovely motifs that you can use to create a design. I think knowing where to start, that's what I tried to help you with the drawings. But again, knowing where to start, what do I make? You may use your cutters and that's fine. But if you want something a little bit more out of the ordinary, Helen's designs are lovely. And all you need to do, if you have some greaseproof paper, I use this all the time. Tracing paper is incredibly expensive for some reason, but baking parchment is actually relatively cheap. So what you can do is you may get a tracing of the drawing, and this way you don't lose the drawing either, because you may want that later. And that gives you the outline that you want to cut out. So rolling again, get the thickness that you want. If you like sugarcraft, this is again something that you probably already do. So now instead of cutting it out, and you see the greaseproof actually sticks, if you press down, you will see that the indentation of what it is you want to cut out impressed. There we go. So now if you have a knife, you don't even need a craft knife. And if you just watch the way I'm cutting this out, it's not like sawing a log, it's very small movements. And this means, can you see how the line is, A, it's accurate, and B, you're not pulling at the clay. There we go. You can see it's quite an accurate shape, and you see the pattern on the wing. So make a tracing of the wing, find your shape. So there we have the wing. The technique of joining the wing to the bird is exactly the same as you would do with clay. Gently place it on, but then to join, you do what is called cross hatching, which is you just make an indentation with the knife. Can you see it creates like little squares? It's the same with drawing. It's called cross-hatching with drawing. If you make that pattern, you brush a little water on the top of the dough or the clay on both sides, and then gently press down. And what the water does, it creates like a little suction vacuum between the two surfaces, because the water between the two layers will have created a vacuum, and that suction holds the two together, and it bonds as it dries out rather than coming apart. Now, the eye. I've got a little offcut there, and this is where offcuts start to become very useful. It's a bit more pointy than Helen's drawing, so I'm just going to press the edge in. And again, it's the same thing with your crosshatch. So at this point, you look at the shape there and you think, okay, I'm going to pop the eye in there, somewhere there. So you crosshatch again. A wee bit of water. And this is where, if you start to model it, you will feel how soft it is to change the shape. And you just fiddle it until you feel, okay, that's okay. The eye is not quite as it looks in the drawing. So this is where you can start to look around the kitchen or wherever you are and find something with a point to make your eye. And you can adapt things as you need to. And if you're not using the dough, what I would suggest, you take out as much as you need and then put the rest in just a zip-up bag, and that will keep it. So for the tail, I've got a fork that actually really fits nicely to Helen's drawing. So I don't want it that angle, so you gradually bring it around till you think, okay, let's go with that. It won't be identical, so you press it in till you see it coming through and then lift it out. And if you want to put one more on there, which I do, there we go. So Helen's got lots of lovely shapes here. If you are working with children, maybe use one of their drawings as the template, so then they can make their drawing and turn it into another form. And I think that's quite a nice thing for someone to do as well. So I guess with the method of making, it's a similar process that we did in the drawing videos, where you start with line, create shape, and then you work with texture and it builds it up in layers. So in a very simple way, this will give you an idea of the very, very basic steps of working with clay. And as you get used to working with the dough on the flat, you will hopefully start to get a bit more confidence. So this cutting out, great. Using a drawing or a picture to cut out, it's a step more creative. But as you work with the clay, you will probably start quite naturally, without thinking about it, start to model it a little bit more. So here, I want to show you how you can work pattern into it. And I've just cut out some simple shapes from Helen's designs, and we're going to look at this same kind of pattern she's created in the wings and see if we can create them on our pastry or clay butterfly. So the best place to start is having a rootle around your kitchen and seeing what things you find with interesting patterns or shapes. If you look at this wee whisk, let's see what kind of pattern that creates. Yeah, it's kind of, I quite like that actually. So it doesn't have to be the same as Helen's. You can find your own way. What I found one useful thing is if you need a curve, a spoon can kind of create an indentation, which is can be quite useful. If you go wrong, just put your finger over. So that is your rubber. Just don't do it too much, otherwise you'll end up with very claggy clay or dough. When you're baking, if you're baking tarts or something, this is something that you will all know. Putting the edge on a pie. So hopefully you've noticed how you don't draw. I've seen a lot of people, once they get to this bit, they want to draw the design in. It's much more successful if you just make imprints and find things that will do that for you. And maybe an obvious thing, but is just to get a pencil or a pen and just create patterns with dots. I think sometimes the simplest things end up being the most effective. In fact, usually that's the case. So if you're working with children, plastic cutlery is obviously the safer thing to use. And this one has a serrated edge, which is actually quite nice. So it doesn't have to be complicated. And it doesn't have to be difficult. So obviously that's all flat. To add a bit more detail, this is where you can join a layer on. So the butterfly has a head, so I'm just going to roll that. So it's the same technique, crosshatch with the water. And there's your head. So even if you start with pattern, you can still build into it. And this you can do until you air dry it. Once the clay or the dough is air dry, you can't change it. You can't add to it. So you keep building things up as much or as little as you want to. That's my dough all finished. So this wee flower is the last thing. So straight in, straight out. And I think with this, it's knowing when to stop. That's often a very hard thing when you're painting or drawing or anything, is it finished? And that's not always easy to know. It's actually a very direct way of working. You have to know what you're going to do when you do it. So when you've done as much decoration as you want to, the next stage is clear a space where you can leave these to dry. It usually takes about a week. And again, this is the same as for working with clay. This is one I made yesterday and you'll see the difference. Can you see on the top? It's a different colour to the clay or the dough that we've just made, if you turn it over, it's not dry. So your aim is to air dry these until it's like that all the way through. So I would advise air dry it for about a week until both sides are dry, and you can lift it and turn it over and dry the other side. You can see how it lifts off. Once it's dry, it lifts off very easily. This one's a bit sticky because it's a bit bigger. So you just turn them over and dry them on the other side once they're dry. If you want to move them, simplest way to do that is, because they're still on the greaseproof paper, you just put a board, piece of card or something, and slide the pieces onto the board. And that means you're not going to be using your baking sheets or anything like that. When they're dry, you put them on a baking sheet, put your oven on its lowest setting, and bake the dough for about 3 hours. After 3 hours, lift them up, and if it still looks soft in the middle, turn them over and bake the other side. So once they've been baked, you obviously leave them to cool, but then at that stage you can leave them as they are if you want them monochrome like that, or you can paint them. Hope you've enjoyed watching how to do this, and I hope you found it useful. Even better if you have a go. If you do, please let Aunts Care know and see what you've created. So thank you very much.